I still remember the exact moment my stomach dropped. It was payday, and my bank balance was $312 short. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Payroll glitch, maybe. But deep down, something told me this wasn't an accident. Not at Brightvale Marketing. Not under Mr. Collins. You see, when I joined the company a year ago, I thought I'd found it, my break. The kind of job where hard work actually meant something. The office was sleek, the coffee was free, and the CEO, well, he was the kind of man who made you believe in opportunity. Mr. Collins had this charm, that calm, fatherly confidence that made you want to prove yourself. He remembered birthdays, asked about your weekend, even sent my mom flowers when she was sick. I used to call him the boss who actually cares. And for a while, I really believed it. I was the new marketing analyst, eager, overworked, underpaid, but full of drive. I'd stay late perfecting ad reports no one asked for, hoping he'd notice. And he did. One evening he passed by my cubicle, smiled, and said, "People like you are the backbone of this company, Emily." Those words kept me going through nights of cold takeout and glowing screens. But then, things started to feel off. A coworker, James, got fired out of nowhere. No explanation, just gone. Another, Lila, whispered about adjustments in her paycheck that didn't make sense. Whenever someone brought it up, Mr. Collins would smile and say, "Finance is reviewing it." Still, I pushed doubts aside. Loyalty was my thing. I owed this man my career. Until that Friday, when I checked my payslip and saw the adjustment. No explanation. No overtime bonus. Just missing money. I stared at it for hours, refreshing the page like it might change if I wished hard enough. I even emailed HR, and guess who replied? Mr. Collins himself. "Emily, don't worry about the discrepancy. It'll all balance out next month." No apology. No details. Just that. But something about his tone, that subtle dismissiveness, hit different. Like I wasn't supposed to ask questions. That night, as I locked up my laptop, I noticed something strange. An open folder on our shared drive titled Vendor Rebates, Internal Only. I shouldn't have clicked it. But I did. And what I saw inside made me realize, I wasn't just underpaid. I was being played. I wish I could say I closed that folder right away. But curiosity has a way of turning into obsession. Inside were spreadsheets with numbers that didn't add up. Payments to companies I'd never heard of, invoices marked as rebates, and, strangest of all, several labeled consulting fees that looked eerily similar to my missing overtime totals. At first, I told myself it wasn't my place. Maybe finance had some complicated system I didn't understand. Maybe I was reading it wrong. But that voice in my head, the one that used to whisper "You're lucky to be here," was now saying, "Something's not right." The next morning, I tried to act normal. I smiled through meetings, handed in my reports, even laughed when Mr. Collins made one of his trademark dad jokes about tight budgets. But his laughter felt forced. And when our eyes met, I caught a flicker of something cold behind his usual warmth. Then came the first red flag. At lunch, I overheard him in his office, door slightly ajar, speaking to someone on the phone. "No, she doesn't know. She thinks it's an accounting delay. Keep it that way." The "she" could have been anyone. But my gut twisted. Later I asked HR about the missing money again, and they suddenly claimed my timesheets hadn't been properly approved. Which was odd. Mr. Collins personally signed them every month. When I mentioned that, the HR rep just smiled nervously and said, "He's a busy man, Emily. Don't make it harder for him. Don't make it harder for him." That phrase stuck like a thorn. Still, I wanted to believe the best. He'd been kind to me. Supportive. He wasn't the type to cheat people, right? But the little things started piling up. James, the fired coworker, messaged me out of the blue. "Careful who you trust. You're smarter than I was." And then, silence. His account disappeared the next day. That same week, Mr. Collins's attitude toward me shifted. He started calling me kiddo again, something he hadn't done since my first month. The tone felt patronizing now, like a reminder of my place. He began excluding me from meetings I'd always been part of. And once, when I asked about a project budget, he smiled too sweetly and said, "Leave the numbers to the adults, yeah?" I laughed it off in the moment, but my chest ached later. Because that was the first time I realized I wasn't part of his team anymore. I was a liability. That night, I reopened the vendor rebates folder. This time, I noticed a subfolder with my initials, EJ, tucked deep inside. Password protected. My hands trembled. Why would my boss have a secret file with my name on it? It took me 2 days to find the courage to open that file. The password was a puzzle, one only someone close to Mr. Collins would guess. I tried birthdays, project names, even his dog's name. Nothing worked. And then I remembered something he said once, after a long night in the office. Every good business runs on trust, and a little bit of insurance. Insurance. That was it. When the file unlocked, my screen flooded with documents, pay records, emails, and internal memos. But they weren't just mine. They were altered versions of mine. My salary was listed as $78,000, not the $55,000 I'd been getting. My overtime bonuses? Approved, and then rerouted to something called Vendor Account 3B. I scrolled faster, heart hammering. The so-called vendor account had my employee ID tagged next to every transfer. On paper, I was the one receiving the extra funds. They'd built a paper trail, one that made it look like I was embezzling money from the company. I froze. My entire career, my reputation, everything, could vanish with a single audit. The betrayal hit me like a truck. Mr. Collins hadn't just underpaid me. He'd used me. My name, my trust, my hard work, all twisted into his cover-up. I opened one more document, an email thread between him and the head of finance. From Collins@brightvale.com to finance@brightvale.com. E. Jameson's compensation discrepancy has been handled. Keep her on the low bracket. She's too loyal to notice. Too loyal to notice. My eyes blurred with tears, the words burning into my skull. Every compliment, every late-night pep talk, every "your family here," suddenly reeked of manipulation. He'd kept me close not because he believed in me, but because I was useful. I thought about James, the fired coworker, the warning message, the missing money. It all made sense now. He'd probably found the same thing, and Mr. Collins erased him for it. My throat tightened as anger simmered beneath the shock. All those months I'd defended him, worked weekends, skipped dinners, while he pocketed my pay and made me his scapegoat. I slammed my laptop shut, breathing hard. The office was quiet. Too quiet. Outside, the city lights glowed through the blinds, cold and distant. For the first time, I didn't feel scared. I felt clear. Mr. Collins thought I was loyal. That I'd stay quiet. That he could take everything from me and I'd just smile through it. But that night, as I stared at my reflection in the dark window, I knew something had changed. He took my money. He almost took my dignity. Now, I was going to take everything from him. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my apartment floor, laptop open, staring at the evidence. The falsified records, the forged approvals, the email that reduced me to a loyal fool. Every time I read it, something inside me cracked a little more. 4 hours, I cycled through every emotion imaginable. Disbelief, humiliation, rage. Then back to disbelief again. How could someone I trusted, someone who sent flowers to my mother, strip me of my name, my worth, my future? Around 3 a.m., my inbox pinged. A new message. Anonymous sender. Subject: "You're not the first." Inside was a single attachment, a PDF labeled Internal Audit 2018. My hands shook as I opened it. Page after page of names, employees who'd resigned or been terminated for misconduct. And next to each one, a pattern: altered pay slips, false expense logs, rerouted bonuses. At the bottom of the document, a note in bold: every empire built on deceit collapses eventually. Don't let him bury you too. That was my breaking point. And my awakening. I broke down crying, shoulders trembling, years of pent-up loyalty dissolving into raw fury. All the nights I stayed late to prove myself, all the projects I carried when others quit, they weren't just ignored, they were exploited. Then, in the middle of that breakdown, I remembered something my dad once told me after I got rejected from my first internship. Don't let them decide you're worth them. When people underestimate you, that's your advantage. That sentence hit like lightning. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and opened my laptop again. For the first time since discovering the truth, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous. I started tracing the money, every fake vendor, every consulting fee, every account tied to his network. It wasn't just Betrayal. Mr. Collins had a whole system: offshore transfers, shell companies, fake invoices. I organized everything into folders, screenshots, backups. I mapped it like a war plan. The more I uncovered, the steadier my hands became. I wasn't the naive analyst anymore. I was an investigator, a witness. And when the clock hit sunrise, I looked out over the city and whispered to myself, he thought I was loyal. He was right, just not to him. That morning, I put on my work clothes, tied my hair back, and walked into Betrayal with a smile so calm it scared even me. Because I had made a vow, one that burned hotter than any anger I'd ever known. I wasn't just going to expose his corruption. I was going to make him watch it crumble, one lie at a time. For a week I moved like a ghost inside Betrayal, present but invisible, smiling but always calculating. Revenge wasn't a single moment. It was a patient architecture. I drew blueprints on sticky notes, then ripped them into neat piles of tasks and timelines. The old, scared Emily would have charged in. The new Emily measured angles, tested hinges, and set traps that didn't look like traps. I made copies of everything I already had, screenshots of the vendor rebates folder, the email where Mr. Collins called me too loyal to notice, the altered payslips. I duplicated backups onto encrypted drives I kept in a friend's apartment. No dramatic hacking, just careful, legal preservation of files I had access to. If anyone questioned how I got them, the truth would be, I found them where they were left exposed. I didn't have to recruit soldiers. I needed witnesses. Lila, the whisperer from payroll, had noticed the odd deductions but had been told to stay quiet. Over coffee, I gave her a simple choice: protect a job by covering up, or protect a future by telling the truth. She cried, then agreed to hand me a set of internal audit emails she'd been saving. James, the ghost who'd warned me, turned out to be braver than I thought. He sent me an encrypted message containing an anonymous ledger he'd pulled before he disappeared. A quiet group of people, each with a small piece, suddenly became a mosaic. Misdirection and psychology. Mr. Collins's greatest strength was his ego. He loved being the puppeteer, the generous father figure. So I fed him what he wanted: stability, flattery, a few accidental nods to his competence in my reports. Let him sink deeper into believing nothing could touch him. While he preened, I watched which assistants had access to which servers, which auditors he trusted, which offshore contacts used the same formatting in their invoices. I logged patterns, not secrets. Patterns are undeniable. If one path closed, another had to open. I quietly consulted an employment lawyer, not to file yet, but to understand the thresholds that would trigger an external investigation. I prepared an anonymous tip for an external regulator, phrased carefully so it would get routed for review without revealing my identity. I also documented every interaction with HR and Mr. Collins in a dated journal. Names, times, snippets of conversation. Paper is old-fashioned, but juries like paper. At night I stitched everything together into a narrative, a clean, ruthless story that led straight to him. Motives, method, and cover-up. I rehearsed how it would look to an auditor, to the press, to the board. Every move minimized my exposure and maximized the crack in his empire. On the Thursday before the audit window, I sent one last, tiny signal. An unsigned email to the head of external audit with just enough detail to make them look. It was a whisper in a corridor that would turn into an alarm bell. That evening I sat at my kitchen table, the city lights smeared by rain, the drives humming with copies of his lies. I felt calm and dangerous in the same breath. Some things crumble quietly. Some explode. Tomorrow, I decided, I would make sure his did both. The morning the alarms started, Brightvale still smelled of coffee and optimism. By noon it smelled like fear. My unsigned tip had done its job. An external audit team arrived with formal letters and stern faces. They moved like professionals, polite, precise, utterly immune to charisma. I watched from my desk as men and women in navy suits asked for files, logs, and approvals. They asked for things Mr. Collins had always made sure were tidy on the surface but rotten underneath. He tried to contain it the way he always had, with a smile. He called an all-hands, stood at the front of the auditorium with that same calm, fatherly cadence. "Team," he said, "we're cooperating fully with an unrelated review." A few heads nodded. He had rehearsed it. He thought it would be enough. It wasn't. Lila handed over the audit emails she'd stashed. James's ledger, the one he'd sent me before he vanished, arrived encrypted, and the auditors had the key. Finance produced a stack of invoices with identical formatting, routed through shell entities tied to a single director, Mr. Collins. Every consulting fee, traced back to accounts he implicitly controlled. The vendor rebates folder I'd found? The auditors had it, complete with my screenshots and metadata showing who accessed and altered the files. When the forensic accountant spoke, nobody could ignore it. "We have linked unauthorized transfers and falsified payroll entries to executive oversight," she said. The room seemed to tilt. Mr. Collins's calm cracked like thin glass. He whispered to legal, whispered to HR, then tried charm. "This is a misunderstanding." He tried blame, technical error. He even tried tears, a calculated flash of vulnerability, but the board had already seen the ledgers. The board members who once toasted him now exchanged hard looks and phone calls. The first blow was corporate: emergency meeting, immediate suspension, assets temporarily frozen while regulators opened inquiries. Brightvale's PR released a terse statement: "We are cooperating with authorities." Media calls started. A morning show played a clip of him saying, "People like you are the backbone of this company," with the caption, "CEO? Or con artist?" His philanthropic awards remained on the mantle, but invitations stopped arriving. Then the criminal inquiries began. When the investigators asked for his home accounts, his spouse, introduced in every company profile as his rock, sat in the lobby and asked for a lawyer. Friends who once described him as generous called him unreachable. People he had bought loyalty from with dinners and favors turned their backs when subpoenas were mentioned. Greed had isolated him. His empire required other people's silence to survive, and silence was the one thing he no longer had. I didn't watch him dragged away. That wasn't cinematic, and it wasn't mine to enjoy. But I watched him in smaller destructions. The boardroom where he sat muted while auditors outlined transfers, the televised apology that sounded like a script he hadn't written himself, the empty seat at the charity gala where his portrait hung awkwardly above unopened champagne. Each moment echoed the same truth. He had built power on other people's dignity, and dignity, once taken, can be reclaimed. That evening, the payroll department sent a company-wide email acknowledging discrepancies and promising an independent review and restitution. I opened the attachment with steady hands. It listed corrected entries, timelines for payments, and, small, but precise, the amount that had been adjusted for my file. No triumphant ticker tape, just numbers balancing at last. I shut my laptop. The city outside my window hummed as if nothing had happened. Inside the room, light fell across the desk where I'd once stayed late hoping for praise. The glass of the window held my reflection, tired, lined with what I'd lived through, and behind it, the dark silhouette of Mr. Collins's office, its lights finally off. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of my own breath. The world had shifted, it had cost him everything, and it had cost me nights I'd never get back. Justice had a price, but so did silence. I let the quiet sit with me. It was, I realized, the kind of silence that followed an explosion. Heavy, absolute, utterly final. The weeks that followed felt unreal, like walking through the ruins of a building I once helped construct. Brightvale still stood, but the shine was gone. The lobby plants wilted. The receptionist no longer smiled like everything was fine. People spoke in whispers now, cautious and tired, as if afraid their words might turn into evidence. Mr. Collins was gone, of course. Pending legal proceedings, the email had said. His office, once the nerve center of the company, now sat empty, blinds half drawn, a single photo frame left behind on the desk. It was a picture of the staff from a summer retreat, all of us grinning like fools around him. I was right beside him, arms crossed, trying to look confident. I almost didn't recognize the girl in that photo. Justice didn't feel like fireworks. It felt quiet, like a weight slowly being lifted after years of carrying it without realizing. I didn't get a raise or a promotion. I didn't even get an apology. But I got something better. The truth. The world knew what he did. And that meant I could finally breathe without doubting my worth. Brightvale's board reached out weeks later with an offer to restore internal trust. They wanted me to assist with the transparency overhaul, new payroll systems, new auditing tools. I accepted, not out of loyalty, but because I wanted to make sure no one else would ever be used the way I was. One evening, I stayed late again. My old habit. The city lights blinked outside, and for a moment, I felt that old ache of exhaustion and hope. But this time, there was no fear behind it. I looked at my reflection in the dark window and whispered, "You're not the fool they thought you were." Mr. Collins's trial became public a few months later. Embezzlement. Fraud. Employee exploitation. He lost everything. The company, the house, the awards. But the part that hit me hardest was when the news anchor said, no one from Brightvale attended the hearing in his support. Loneliness. That was his final payment. The perfect symmetry. He stole from others to feel powerful, and in the end, he was left with nothing and no one. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's the silence that follows when the truth finally lands. A silence that stretches, cleansing, final. I closed the news tab, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Worth every penny." Epilogue. Breaking the fourth wall movie camera. You know, when betrayal happens, it doesn't just break your trust. It breaks something inside you that you have to rebuild, piece by piece. But here's the thing. Once you rebuild it, you're stronger than the person who tried to destroy you. Have you ever been underpaid, underestimated, or betrayed by someone who thought they could get away with it? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you believe in karma catching up, hit subscribe. Because trust me, this isn't the last time justice gets served. Money with wings fire.